Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Screening Room AV's video podcast series. Our first episode here is a Physical Media Dead with special guests Bill Hunt of the Digital Bits and Kris of Deep Dive AV. I'm John Schuermann with the Screening Room, and this is Steve Crabb with the Screening Room. Say hi, Steve.
Hello, everybody. Hey, everybody.
All right. Yep. And so do some quick introductions here, and we'll move quickly on so we can start talking about all this fun stuff. A little bit about us, the Screening Room. We're kind of proud of the fact we're the top-rated Colorado AV and home theater company. We're up to 161 five-star reviews these days, and nothing less than that, and we're pretty happy with those. But we do have a national footprint, so we're kind of known nationally for doing kind of mid to high-end home theater systems and designs. There's our contact info there. Just move through here. And one of our big claims to fame is doing controlled comparisons of products. Last year with Kris Deering, we did an 8-projector shootout where we had 8 projectors all calibrated and people fly in from all over the country and compare them. And then we did a speaker shootout back in April where we did a bunch of speakers behind an acoustically transparent screen, so they're all hidden from view, so nobody knew what they were listening to. So it was a truly scientifically controlled comparison. That's kind of what we're known for. And so that's kind of our unofficial tagline, scientifically justified high end. If we can't justify it in some way scientifically in terms of controlled testing, we don't get behind it. And one of the things we have learned is the most expensive is not always the best. So that's what we're all about. There's our little tiny commercial. And move on from there. First, I want to talk about Mr. Bill Hunt, who's joining us today. Kind of inspired this particular webcast. Because he wrote an article that broke the news that Best Buy had stopped carrying physical media, and it kind of, I understand, it broke his website. Got a national mention on The Tonight Show. So Bill's been the founder, editor-in-chief of the Digital Bits for 26 years now, has covered every major physical media story from before the dawn of DVD. Broke the Best Buy getting out of physical media story, like I said. He's a writer and an author, a speaker, a futurist, film critic, and historian, a regular advisor and consultant to the home entertainment industry, and a former columnist for Widescreen Review, Video Business, Video Store, Geek Monthly, and more. And what I like about Bill is that he actually talks to the people at the studio that know what's going on. He has relationships with many of the people at the studios. So I know like a lot of people just put out a whole bunch of where they're just taking wild guesses at things. Bill actually usually has the inside scoop. So, Bill, do you want to say anything real quick after that introduction? Go ahead. Sorry.
No, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I've been doing it long enough that I know people at every studio and at every level of the industry. So, when I have a question, I can usually pick up a phone and get an answer. And I've established enough of a relationship with a lot of these people now that there's a level of trust. So they know they can talk to me, and I'm not going to just automatically post everything on the website, which allows me to kind of have my ear to the ground and know what's going on in the industry in terms of just various kinds of projects and initiatives and titles that might be being remastered and that kind of thing. And and it also allows me to just have a kind of a realistic perspective of what's going on in the industry. And then I can bring that to our readers and give them the benefit of that perspective. And then I can in turn kind of let me take the temperature of my readers and let my studio friends know kind of what people are thinking, what they want, what the market's like, what people are buying, that sort of thing. So I think the Bits place in this industry is, there have been a lot of websites that cover DVD, things like that, but I think our place is unique. I think we're the certainly the oldest of the websites, and a lot of other good sites have kind of fallen by the wayside over the years or discontinued. So we have a kind of a unique place in the industry.
Yeah, and what I appreciate, Bill, is that you kind of pull no punches, tell it like it is. You're diplomatic, but also say the truth. And that's what we try to focus on. We want to put out reliable, good information. And I've always reached out to you. As you know, we've known each other for a few years now.
Yeah.
And I just always know with you, I'm going to get the straight story without any embellishment, no hype or whatever. And that kind of fits what we're trying to do with these webcasts. So
yeah, and it's interesting because my studio friends, I think they appreciate that as well. I mean, sometimes we have some hard words for them, but they always know it's coming from a place of like, look, we want this industry to continue. We want these discs to be as great as they can possibly be. We want to help them, and so sometimes a little bit of tough love is what's necessary. But they also know that we're going to be the first to praise them when they do a great job on something. And part of the interesting thing that's happened recently, and this is something we can get into, is that a lot of the people who really were part of the golden age of discs, who really built the physical media business, a lot of those folks are gone now at the studios. So a lot of the people that are there now are people who were brought in to sort of be part of the streaming age, and with a focus on the streaming operation and digital. And obviously the trends in the market have been such recently that digital operations aren't making very much money. And all of a sudden, a lot of the studios have remembered that, hey, we used to sell a lot of discs, and still are in some cases. And so now you have people whose first focus in the industry was digital, trying to figure out how to do discs again, which makes for some funny situations, in recent months.
Well, that's exactly the kind of stuff I'm sure we're going to get into. So let me move on to Kris here real quick, and then I'm going to throw the ball back to you, Bill, because you had the big breaking news story. So I'll swing it back to you. I want to talk to Kris here real quick, and then we'll be right back. So Mr. Kris Deering has been in a couple of webinars we've done in the past about projectors, and he was a big part of our projector shootout we did last August, I think is when it was, right, Steve? I think we had a bunch of 8 projectors and a bunch of bodies in a room, and it got really hot in there. I think pretty sure it was August. But Kris, I've known Kris for many years. Professional AV calibrator. He does consulting and education services at a very high level. 2 decades of high-level home theater experience. Consulted for some of the biggest names in the AV industry. He does on-site, remote, and pre-arrival projector calibration services. We take advantage of that quite a bit when we sell a projector. We often send it to Kris to have it calibrated. Former technical editor and writer, Secrets of Home Theater and High Fidelity, Home Theater Magazine, and Sound and Vision. And 24 years working for and with the U.S. Navy, including as an acoustic engineer for the Navy's Submarine Acoustic Health Program. So, Kris, you want to add anything to all those superlatives there?
No, thanks for having me. Should be fun talking with Bill. I've been reading Bill's stuff since early on. I started actually before some of these other ones that you list, writing DVD reviews when DVD was in its infancy for some of the forums, actually doing published reviews for that. And, I think I'd met Bill a few times at some real early Blu-ray events and things like that. So Looking forward to talking about movies and discs and streaming and all that with you guys.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to go through a quick list of topics, what we plan to cover. It's probably going to be a pretty quick hour, and I'll get rid of this PowerPoint here in a second. But obviously, the future of physical media, that's the hot topic right now. And it's interesting. You read the forums and you read the Facebook groups and all that. Everybody's got an opinion, and you wonder where these opinions come from. They just seem to kind of pull them out of the air. And so we're going to try to explore this based upon, some actual knowledge of the industry. What future special features look like, because as people move to streaming, that's one of the things that kind of gets lost. Licensing titles to some of the boutique labels, we're seeing more and more of that. Anything that Bill might have some tidbits about some upcoming releases. I know he's got info on the James Cameron stuff. I know he's already broke that, but we might touch on that. What Best Buy's actual market share is, because I think some people would think overestimated how big Best Buy actually is there. And then we'll talk about on the technical end of it, because Kris, Steve, and I have certainly been comparing Kaleidescape and streaming and disc and all of that. How is it all compare? And we'll try to do some myth busting there and kind of bust through some misconceptions. Some of the other things that enthusiasts use, Plex and Zappiti. Zappiti just recently went out of the market, but they kind of have a replacement. And then we'll do a Q&A at the very end, though Steve's going to monitor any traffic in the Facebook groups. And if something seems pertinent, we might drop in. So please hang out. We'll have some time for Q&A, and then maybe we'll tease some upcoming webcasts after that. So with that said, I'm going to stop this PowerPoint, and I'll throw it back at you, Bill. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what it was like to break that story and any other additional perspectives you want to share with us there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was pretty late on a Wednesday night a couple of weeks ago that I started hearing from some of my studio friends that they had been in meetings with Best Buy. in theory, the meetings were about planning the slate of, exclusive Steelbook titles for for early next year. And all of a sudden they started to hear in these meetings that Best Buy was going to be pulling out. And so I started, like, it was pretty late in the evening, I think on that Wednesday, and my phone started blowing up with texts and messages. And so I was pretty quickly able to make a couple of phone calls and confirm it. And what happened was when some of these studio people like knew that I knew, they suddenly really wanted to talk about it. And all of them had basically heard the same thing. I checked with a couple different studio they'd all been told the same thing. So the next day I put this on the website that Best Buy was going to be exiting physical media, and it was supposed to happen at the end of Q1 of next year. And oh my God, it blew up everywhere. I mean, we get a pretty good amount of traffic on the Bits website, but we're not the New York Times. But man, all of a sudden, the site slowed to a crawl. It was people were having a hard time reading it. I mean, it was it was a bit of a challenge because I think it shocked everybody. It took a lot of people by surprise. So it went all over the place. As you said, it made the Tonight Show monologue and a whole bunch of stuff. So, which is fascinating to me that it caught people sort of that by surprise, because if you'd been to a Best Buy store in the last couple of years, it was pretty obvious that they've been shrinking their physical media sections, right? And even recently in the last few months, having gone to our local Best Buy here in Orange County, they, I would go in on a Tuesday to ask for the exclusive title coming out that day, and they wouldn't have it on the floor, and they wouldn't even know what I was talking about, and they would have to go to the stockroom to find it. So, it's not like Best Buy has been given extra love to physical media for the last couple of years.
Yeah, I'm curious about they would have exclusive titles, so that's going to end completely too. And it was funny. One of my favorite movies is the original Wicker Man, not the Nicolas Cage remake, but the original.
Yeah.
And it keeps showing not available every time I go to try to order it. So they're done, right? Completely done.
Yeah, they're going to be done. There'll be no more exclusives. They're going to be completely done with physical media. They're going to still do games, but in terms of movies, they're out, and including all those exclusives. Now, what I'm told by a few different studios that have done some of those Best Buy exclusives is that they're sending some of them to Amazon. They're sending some of them to Walmart, and that makes sense. On your PowerPoint slide there, you talked about the Best Buy market share, and we can get into that. But it certainly makes sense for Amazon and Walmart to pick up the slack on that. And I think that's what's going to happen. The other thing I'm hearing is that at least one of these studios is probably going to set up their own online, like, web store, kind of like what Shout Factory has or what Arrow Video has, so you can buy direct from them and get some exclusive, packaging or something like that. And that also makes sense, because as far as I'm concerned, we're back to a collector's market, right? We're back to kind of the Laserdisc days when these titles were sort of a little more bespoke and targeted directly at collectors who are still buying discs.
And I imagine it's a large part of our listening, viewing audience today is that type of person. Go ahead, Kris.
Well, the interesting thing there is, again, kind of looking at that, Best Buy did have a small market share. We saw the number on that that you're talked about. And if you look at physical presence of stores, Walmart has the biggest the presence. But I mean, even Walmarts are everywhere. I've been in lots of them. I always kind of go like, oh, what do they got and stuff like that. I mean, we're getting to the point now where, like if you went to Best Buy 4 years ago, they had lots of racks, like usually like a whole row, and it would be, going down the lines and stuff like that. Plus their little rack at the front with, hey, this is this week's releases and stuff like that. Walmart used to have a pretty good section, but even Walmart now is usually an end cap and then the buckets, the big bins of like, here's the $5 ones, here's the $8 ones. And then they do like special stuff around the holidays and things like that. So they're disappearing where, you're talking about, okay, now we're getting more to the specialized market of the Laserdisc days. And I agree with that in some sense. We're seeing the rise of like the Arrow videos, the Kino Lorber videos. But I also feel like, Arrow's been around for a while. I think the only thing that's really changed, we used to have Shout Factory, Arrow Video, Twilight Time, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
None of these are newcomers. The thing is that I feel like they're getting more recognition lately because in the past, the studios were not very quick to license titles that most people honestly cared about, unless you were talking about like you're somebody that's really into niche titles or like, those kind of things, like the B movie generate, the people that love those kind of things, where now you're starting to see them step into not really B titles, maybe the B plus to A minus. I wouldn't call any of it
Yeah.
like A plus stuff. It's still like kind of the 80s and 90s and some late 70s kind of titles that people like, but I wouldn't say that they're sought after titles. So they're starting to, feel more relevant because people are saying like, oh, wow, that's a title I liked when I was, this age or whatever. Where in the, the Laserdisc days, when it was, to me, that format was geared far more toward a, the collector, as you said. But if you look at Laserdisc, because I mean, I was around it, I kind of got in at the tail end of Laserdisc, other than Criterion, everything was studio driven. The studios were selling the Star Wars box sets. Again, Criterion was really the only label that was doing something that was like, above and beyond that. Where now, to see a studio put out a special edition of anything seems, kind of few and far between. I mean, again, there's always exceptions, but it's obviously the exception right now. But I agree with you that like to be the collector, especially at our age, where again, 70s, 80s, and 90s movies are probably more relevant to our age group because we grew up on those movies. Yes, we're starting to see where, these niche ones like, again, Arrow and things like that are kind of bringing those into the fold. So
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting mix because a studio like, for example, Warner Brothers will do 10 or 12 catalog titles a year, right? Whereas Paramount is doing 20 or 30 catalog titles a year. Universal's doing 20 or 30 catalog titles a year. And then Paramount is also licensing out titles like War of the Worlds and some various things. But then Paramount themselves did Dragon Slayer, right? Which that's certainly a niche title, but they chose to do that themselves. But Arrow is Arrow and Kino Lorber Studio Classics and some of these other companies, Imprint, they're all licensing a ton of titles. So it's like the studios seem to want to do their marquee catalog, or at least the upper levels of the marquee catalog, and then they license out to some of the different companies. But then you have a company like Disney that hasn't licensed really anything at all. I think they've only a couple titles in the last few years. Wally, I think they licensed to Criterion.
Yeah, to Criterion.
That was a one-off deal, right? It was just a one-off thing. But then they aren't really mining their catalog at all on physical media. And at the same time, it's weird because their focus is supposedly digital, right? But they're not putting these titles on their streamers either. So there's like this weird kind of disconnect that's going on there. But
go ahead.
Well, I just think we seem to be heading back into this something like a collector's market. It's like the mentality at the studios is still that it's a mass market product, but it's clear that my audience is they're all film fans and collectors. They're dying for product, like they're dying to buy product. And I've said many times before that this is the only business where people really have to beg for the product they want. It's very strange, and some studios are better than others at meeting that demand. But it'll be interesting to see what happens in the wake of Best Buy. One of the advantages of a studio working with Best Buy is that if you licensed, let's say if you're going to release a title, and you'd have a wide mass market version, then you'd have a Best Buy exclusive version. Best Buy would always pay in advance for the whole run that you gave them. So the studio could say, okay, we're guaranteed to sell X number of titles, make this much money, and we're not going to get any returns back from that. So they know, okay, we've got this much product. They're profit on this title already. So then that gives us confidence to go ahead and move forward on various titles. So that confidence is going to go away because, I don't know that Walmart and Amazon are going to be so willing to do that. And we talked before about the numbers. The market share, apparently Best Buy was only ever 4% of the market. In terms of physical media sales, Walmart is at 45% of the market, and Amazon.
Wow,
you would think Amazon would be just as big a player. They only have 18%, and Target is about 6%. So I think my guess is Target's probably going to end up following Best Buy at some point and they're already kind of shrinking their physical media presence. So this, if Walmart and I think Amazon take advantage, it could be good for them in terms of sales, especially if they establish, the kind of relationships to do exclusives and various things. But I think most people are buying online. I think most collectors are buying their product online.
Most people are buying everything online.
Yeah.
I kind of look at it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John, if you want to.
No, I was just going to say, it's just one of the things we were talking about before we went live here is just how COVID just kind of changed the whole thing. And I always said, once you let that genie out of the bottle where stuff is coming out on streaming instantly or right on the heels, you're not going to jam it back in there again,
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, a major part of what drove it. Steve, did you have something you wanted to throw in there too?
Well, I was just wondering if there's any difference with collectors. I mean, laser discs were a really niche format when we were getting into the hobby, late 80s, early 90s, before DVD came along. Hardly anybody knew anybody who bought laser discs. You were a home video nerd if you bought laser discs. And I'm just wondering if there's any difference now, in the market with Blu-ray and 4K Blu-ray. Are people going to be, some of the collector types going to be more inclined to buy it just because it's such a high quality format?
Yeah, there's definitely some of that. And we have to remember too that the Laserdisc market was only ever a certain size, right? The current disc market on Blu-ray especially, and to a lesser extent 4K, is much bigger than Laserdisc ever was. So it is definitely a larger market. But I mean, it's interesting. John, you talked about, how COVID kind of crushed the market. It's, COVID basically crushed the theatrical business. Yeah. And all these studios overspent so much.
That's what I meant to say. Sorry, I should have been more clear on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I mean, the theatrical business was crushed by COVID because people couldn't go to theaters. And all these studios overspent on their streaming operations, right? First to set up the infrastructure and then to produce content. So they're losing money on that end. But through all of that time, physical media is the thing that is always, the studio physical media, the home video operation in terms of selling physical product has always been in the black because people are buying discs. And in fact, I contend that one of the big reasons DVD was as big as it was because it coincided with a couple things. Obviously, the rise of Netflix, so that you could have stuff sent to you in your mailbox, various kinds of movies. Amazon, so you could purchase that stuff very easily, just a couple clicks, and a couple days later it was in your mailbox. And then, frankly, 9/11 happened right around the same time in that period. So a lot of people had cash that they would have spent on going on vacation or taking the kids to Disneyland or whatever, and they stayed home instead. And a lot of them bought Blu-ray players and bought a new TV, and kind of so there was a lot of trends that led to DVD being as big as it is. And I think, a couple, 2-3 years ago, we were talking about a more precipitous decline in physical media sales, and the numbers showed it. But then the pandemic happened, and now those numbers are kind of going back up again. And I think a lot of people have remembered suddenly, we can buy these titles. We can buy our favorite movies on disc, and we don't have to worry about, let's say if you want to watch a movie, you sit down with your family and go, okay, where is it? We're going to watch it on streaming. Well, where is it? Is it on Netflix? Is it on Amazon Prime? Is it on Apple? Is it on whatever? And it's, it might be on the service you subscribe to. It might not. So the market is kind of split. And I think the other strength that physical media has going for it is, from the studio standpoint, if you convince a person to become a digital only consumer, right? So, and you put a new 4K version of let's say one of their favorite movies on, make that available in 4K. They might spend, $14 or $20 to buy it digitally in 4K, and then they'll never buy it again. They'll just never buy it again because they've got it. They've got it in 4K, and presumably those files keep getting updated as new remasters happen or whatever. But if you make that a physical product and you make it special and you add some new extras, some cool new packaging, some cool swag, some stuff they haven't seen before, people who've already purchased that film 5, 6, 7, 8 times will buy it again for $50, $100. You can't charge that kind of money for a digital file. And as you kind of hinted at earlier, the extras tend to fall by the wayside on digital. It's usually just the movie, and all of that great content ends up, basically marooned on discs in people's collections. And one of the fascinating things I've seen in recent years is this proliferation of channels on YouTube where people are ripping DVDs and Blu-rays and posting documentaries. Like, guys, look at this amazing documentary on Alien that I discovered. And it's like, they're basically just ripping, the content off of their older brother's disc collection. And people are like swarming to it on YouTube going, oh my God, this is amazing. Where was this? And so it's a really fascinating time.
Yeah, it's and Steve and I think can speak to that a little bit too. Steve runs Home Theater Enthusiasts, one of the larger Facebook home theater groups, and we've thrown out a few questions before we did this, and just to get a taste of it. And some people just say, "Oh, you can find all those special features on YouTube," and that's true. Just like you just said, but certainly not all of them are out there.
Oh, yeah.
Me, that's into some of the more obscure films, that stuff's never making it on YouTube. But people are into the mainstream type of releases. Steve, did you have anything that you wanted to add based upon taking that pulse?
I guess I mean I kind of see a little bit of a difference there, right? I mean, if usually when you're watching YouTube, you got your feet up at night and having a beer or whatever, and you're watching kind of passively, and YouTube suggests things based on stuff that you've searched before. It's all algorithm driven. But I think that's a totally different experience than, sitting down with the family on a Saturday night and watching a movie. Maybe you watch Aliens or something like that, and then you start going through some of the special features and behind the scenes stuff, and how did they light that scene, and how they do the audio for that. That's a very different experience than just going to find these loose pieces and parts on YouTube.
Yeah, for sure. And when the bottom line is, when you buy a great box set, like when you buy like the Lord of the Rings box set, it's not at all uncommon for people to watch the whole movie and then get up and have dinner and then come back and watch like 8 hours worth of documentaries. It's the diehard fans are just going to go through all of that stuff and binge it, and having it all in one place, having it all in high quality, that matters to people. And I think the value, I know one of the points you wanted to talk to was this sort of future of special features. Studios just these days in the streaming world aren't willing to spend very much money on creating content. It's typically EPK stuff, right? The promotional stuff that they produce.
Yeah, it's a commercial. They're just making a commercial for the movie. Yeah,
and so that that era of just the great in-depth, elaborate documentaries on our favorite films is kind of gone. I'd love to say that it could happen again, but the interesting thing is what I've noticed also on YouTube is there's a whole kind of strain of YouTuber that's kind of custom creating new documentaries, which tells me that people crave that content. People crave that documentary experience, and the studios right now aren't giving it to them. And so it's there are a lot of reasons why I keep telling the studios that, look, if you do this right, there is absolutely a market. And it's funny because I heard someone complain at a major studio that shall remain nameless, complain that it's too bad the U.S. isn't a collector's market like Japan is. Japan's a big collector's market, and my response to that is, it is a collector's market, and it could be even more of a collector's market. But to create it, you have to cater to it. You have to nurture it. You have to grow it. As a major studio, you have to find your audience. You have to care what they want and what they think. You have to listen to them. You have to speak to them. You have to make these products special rather than just like, dumbing everything down for just, like a middle of the road settings, on all your discs. So compression, audio, all of that, just shooting for the middle of the road consumer. It's like, no, you've got to cater to the enthusiast who really loves this stuff and is buying it. And if you do, I don't see that there's any reason this market can't continue for quite a while.
Well, that's okay. So going into that, one of the things I think that Kris can speak to, and Steve and I to a certain degree too, is what we're seeing out in the trenches. So Kris just got back from a calibration tour in Texas, and was at a fair number of high-end, well, I guess middle and high-end systems, would you say, Kris?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what are you seeing mostly out there in terms of sources?
Well, obviously, okay, so I'm in my 5th year, going out and calibrating systems, and I would say, I started offering consumer services in 2020. Obviously been doing stuff before that, but I mean, actually going into people's home over and over and over again. And let's be frank, if I'm going to somebody's house for a calibration, you're talking about an enthusiast or higher, Mom and pops aren't, like, hey, I heard I can get this TV I bought at Costco calibrated. These are people that are, you know what I mean? Like collectors, the enthusiasts, the diehards. I would say that I'm now to the point where I mean, again, this is just off the cuff. 80% of the houses I go in don't even have a player anymore. I would say that we're at the point where I would say 75% or more of every house I go in, their main or only source for content is a streaming box, a Shield, a Roku, an Apple TV. When I ask them, oh, do you have a player? They're like, no, I have some discs in the back, and stuff like that. But like, we just watch everything this way. Now, you do get a lot of the people that are the Plex people, and they talk about like, oh, I just ripped my, my library. But the thing about the Plex market to me, or, there's other ones that are like Plex and stuff like that, is that I could see the studios starting to, as we saw with Zappiti, starting to crack down on that, because no matter what they all say in the forums and stuff like that, I would say that the majority of the time that I go into somebody's house and they're like, I get the calibration done, they want to look at some content, so they bring up their Plex and stuff like that. And yes, they have some content that they ripped, but there's also clearly a lot of content that they're getting from illegal means. And we all know that, the studios want to crack down on that. And we're at the age now where that's a lot easier to get to. But I do want to go back a little bit on some of the stuff that Bill says, because like obviously Bill's insanely enthusiastic about the disc market, the pre-owned market, and again, I have no ill will toward it. I've been a collector for, I mean, I've had literally racks and racks of movies, and I still have a huge rack upstairs and everything like that.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, even going back to when you talked about like, oh, Disney's doing this, Paramount's doing this, and everything, and I think that COVID was a little bit of a reset on things where they were like, I mean, it kind of happened at a time where, as you said, the streaming services were actually kind of building, like, and they kind of were coming out at that time anyway. It just happened that we had a pandemic at the same time.
Right.
Now, everybody knows that if you're going to build a streaming service like a Disney Plus, an Apple TV Plus, any of these things, there is always going to be a huge upfront investment to, get subscribers in, to get content that's going to lure people in. I mean, if you have a soft rollout, you're dead. You have to show that like, hey, we're going to put money into this and we're looking at the long game and things like that. But I'm looking at like, I have a screenshot here that I'm looking at that shows like disc sales over the last few years. And you definitely see that there was a spike in physical media through the pandemic, 2021, 2022 kind of area like that. But you also see that the vast majority of the product bought was DVD, which still means that most consumers are still looking at it, I think, from a cost perspective more than anything else.
Yeah.
The other thing with special features, though, is that while I totally agree with you that from the collector's standpoint that like, hey, if I love a movie, it's nice getting the nice box set like we used to see. Like The Lord of the Rings was a great example. They used to kill it with those big special editions and stuff like that. But I also wonder if Warner right now wanted to redo a box set for The Lord of the Rings, the guys that are the collectors probably bought the DVD box set. They bought the Blu-ray box set. Now you're going to bring out, the next box set. And it's like, how many of those special features are just reruns of the other ones? I mean, you can only milk that cow so many times, I imagine.
Yeah.
But like, I think Titanic's coming out this year. So maybe that's a test case. I mean, obviously that movie did fairly well at the movie theaters. I mean, I don't think it's a, Conan or anything like that, but it gives them an idea of like, hey, if we still release a collector's edition for obviously a beloved movie on physical media, will it sell? Maybe that is the test case. And, Disney redoing Snow White or something like that, where, it does cater to that. But it does seem like they're offloading the idea of a special edition to licensing things like Arrow and stuff, where, the guys that like to collect can get something from people that obviously are passionate about collecting, the people at Arrow or things like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know if the studios, like when they start looking at how much does it cost to produce this stuff, how much does it stuff to put it on a disc, then we got to do new packaging, then we got to distribute it, then we got to sell it. And now where are we going to sell it at? You're
Yeah.
not going to sell it at Best Buy. You're not going to sell it at Target. You know what I mean?
Right. But I think it is just easier. It makes sense to do it, to license these titles to the smaller companies anyway, because they are going to do a better job. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I think if the studios embrace that idea, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And you mentioned Lord of the Rings. Warner Brothers did just recently put out a big elaborate 4K box set of the Middle Earth films, and they left most of the special features content. There was a little bit, but they basically said, look, every diehard fan has already got all of that content, and so they didn't include all of that, which is totally fine. But then you look at a lot of the stuff that like Criterion or Kino Lorber Studio Classics is doing. They're loading these discs up with content, and what they tend to do is they collect.
But that's their business model, though.
Right, exactly.
Always has been.
Yeah, exactly. But I think for the studios, so I don't think there's any problem with the studios doing that, as long as they're basically willing to license out some of their catalog. I mean, they're going to make money either way. And now what's happening is the batch runs on some of these titles are certainly smaller than they might have been back in the heyday. And you're right, the overwhelming sales of physical media are still DVD, especially globally. But it's definitely, DVD's definitely the thing that sells the most. But
it sells more than both Blu-ray and UHD combined.
To this. Absolutely, and that's really always been the case. Each new format has been smaller than the last one. That's really kind of been the way it has gone.
I'm just wondering if and again, like, I think this whole, like, the trend of Criterion Arrow, it is literally a godsend for the collector.
Yes.
Because again, like, for example, Arrow, I brought up the Conan thing in jest, obviously comparing it to Titanic, but
sure.
Arrow just announced Conan and stuff like that. It's like, I don't know if a studio would have ever done anything nearly as elaborate as what Arrow is going to do with Conan the Barbarian. And again, that's great for, but it is a limited run. Its retail price is $60. So you're starting to get back to like Laserdisc pricing on those kind of things. But I just don't know how much that moves the needle in keeping physical media alive. And when I say alive, I like every physical media for the most part. I mean, obviously you can't buy Laserdisc anymore, but like nobody sits there and says that CDs are still around. We would widely agree with that. Like, you're not going to go into a store, like, maybe they'd have a CD, but CDs last year did $500 million in revenue. I mean, that's a lot. Like, if you would have told me that there was $500 million of CD sales last year, I'd have been like, who's selling them to begin with?
It's all soundtrack collectors. It's funny that
right. But what I'm saying
everybody was having a heart attack because the new John Williams Indiana Jones didn't come out, and boy, all the conspiracy thinking that went into that. But anyhow, go ahead.
I think it just goes to show that, like, I don't think the idea of Blu-ray or anything being completely dead, I don't think was ever on the table.
No, I agree.
As long as there's people that, collectors or whatever, that want to have something more tangible, there will be the Arrows, the Criterions and stuff like that. As long as, again, the licensing fees make sense and they know they can sell a volume that makes it where the business model makes sense. I mean, we see a lot of licensing on the LP side. We see licensing on CD side or whatever. I mean, there's still people selling SACDs at this point, and stuff like that. But I just don't think that, when people say, like, is physical media dead, I don't think that they're saying that, like, are you never going to see it anymore? I think they're looking at it from the perspective of, like, as far as the format goes, it's just not a relevant format anymore. Like, we will get to the point in very, quick way that, other than maybe an end cap at a Target or something like that, you're not going to see it anymore. And,
I would
that's
say
what people meant by that.
Yeah, I would say that from the perspective of my audience, there are a lot of people in my audience that are worried about physical media actually going away, period.
Yeah.
Because I think there's no doubt that digital is the future. I think we all know that's where it's going to go ultimately. But
just like it did with audio. Yeah,
100%. But I totally agree with you that I think there's always going to be a market for people who want a physical copy. And I think I guess my point is that collector, there is a market for selling titles to that collector that can go on for a long, long time. The same way that there are still CD sales, there are now vinyl sales that are bigger than they have been for quite a while. And I think that market can linger for a long time, can last for a long time. And that market may actually be the difference, at least right now, and for the foreseeable future. It might be the difference between a studio being profitable or not, as they try to figure out how to make money with their streaming operation, right? My point is the physical media market for a major studio, it's a low-hanging fruit that they would be crazy not to pick, because why not? If you can make some money doing it, why not do it?
Well, I guess a question from my own little narrow perspective. Bill and I are both pretty big Star Trek fans, and I remember at Paramount when Star Trek: The Motion Picture got its director's edition and all that. It premiered on Paramount Plus, and that was funded in large part by Paramount Plus. But then it also got a physical release with a really nice collector's edition and all that.
Yeah.
Did that do? I mean, I know you kind of have your ear to the ground on the Star Trek thing because you're a fan like me.
Yeah.
But did that do quite well, or do we know?
It did. It did very well. It did well. It did well enough that I can tell you that there are opportunities for future projects like that to happen, and I think they will. So, and I think that makes perfect sense, right?
Very happy. That's the highlight of this webcast for me.
Yeah, because it makes a ton of sense. Because for the streaming operation and the home video studio side can share those costs, right? And then they both benefit. Because one thing that's important to stress is whenever, like, say, you have a 4K title, whenever a studio does a remaster for 4K. Well, it's not like that 4K master is only going to be used for a 4K disc. It's going to go on digital. It's going to go on cable. It's going to go on broadcast. It's going to go on the streamer, right? And oh, by the way, the process of remastering that, you go back to the negative. You probably make a new safety copy, right? So you're preserving the catalog along the way. So to me, that kind of a market can exist indefinitely as long as there are people that want to buy that product. And I think I guess the advice I try to give to the studios is, look, just acknowledge that, Don't worry about, oh my God, it's not a mass market product anymore. And oh my God, Target's going away or Best Buy is going away. It's like, look, man, we are in the world now where you should cater to the collectors. That audience will continue to buy product as long as you will give them product. And I think that's a perfect way for the whole thing to continue.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things, because some of us were kind of, when 4K first came out, a lot of us made the point that, you don't really see the difference in resolution unless you're close enough to the screen and so on and so forth, which is true.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's been great about it, just like the high resolution audio thing where there's a fair amount of snake oil in that thing too. But what's been cool about it is that they've gone back to original master recordings, paying more attention to the overall quality. Going back to original camera negative, which they weren't doing before. They would pull a release print sometimes full of scratches and noise, and so that's been the best thing about it.
Yeah, and the cool thing is if you're a fan of a film, and we're all right about the same age, so a lot of the movies, a lot of these great movies that we love from the 70s and 80s, we first experienced either in a theater or more likely on like television on analog TV, HBO, Cinemax, or whatever. And so all of a sudden, you get a brand new 4K remaster of one of these films and you see it properly in 4K on a good display or projected. And it's like, you're seeing your favorite film in a way that you've never, ever experienced it. Sometimes better than people experienced it in theaters originally.
Yeah, because that's one of my hobby horses is soapboxes have been physical projection of film actually would destroy detail because of all the judder. So we're seeing more details now with these 4K scans than we ever saw before. And sometimes this can be a little problematic. So I just want to say, since we're a little more than the halfway point, if we want, Steve, did you see anything interesting in questions? I was going to...
Yeah, there's a couple things actually. And I think,
and then we can come back to the discussion after. When we just take a break, do that. We'll do station identification and then we'll come back to the discussion. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I was just going to say, a couple of people made some interesting points, and the enthusiast community tends to kind of see things in very black and white, almost binary, like streaming sucks, disc is the best, our discs are dead, like you're never going to be able, like some people think in a year or two you're not going to be able to buy a disc anymore, and so I think from this discussion what we're hearing is that there's going to be a market for enthusiasts for discs for a long time, because one of these people made the let's see, who was it? It was Iglesias from Home Theater Enthusiast said, no one's asking how many companies will be making players or will they even update current models. And that's a good point is, will there even be hardware to play the discs on? And I think the answer to that is kind of the same as disc, which is if people keep buying them, then they'll still make them. but
You
there
can
may
still-
be a time where
Yeah.
it might be hard to get the players.
Maybe, but you can still buy record players, right? You
Well,
can still,
you can buy people still
no.
buy Laserdisc players on eBay.
right?
Yeah,
I have
don't
mine in
think,
garage.
I don't think that there's any validity at all to comparing anything that we're talking about right now with vinyl. Like this, like DVD, Blu-ray, VHS, they're not going to be vinyl later. Nobody's going back and be like, oh, but Laserdisc is like the vinyl of video. Let's start buying Laserdisc. Like that is its own animal that is never going to be something that's like the parallel to something here.
There are some interesting parallels there. I hang out in some of those Laserdisc groups just to kind of like, keep my finger on the pulse. It's interesting, maybe it's a nostalgia thing, but I think some people still love that. They still handling the big shiny disc just like they like handling the big vinyl discs.
It's the same size.
Well,
as
I think
vinyl,
the other thing that nobody's talking about is like, let's look at the four of us. What we're probably an age range. I might be the young one here.
You're the
40.
you're the youngster.
Yeah,
Chris.
and I'm coming up on 50, right? So the difference I think between this market, like Bill talks about it being indefinite, right? And I agree to a point, but I also think it's a generational thing.
Yes.
At the end of the day, we are that generation that kind of came up where, pretty much you had VHS. And I mean, God, when I was a kid, we used to watch movies all the time, but we couldn't. Like VHS was really expensive to buy in the beginning. You usually rented a VHS player. You didn't buy one because it was so expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So, I came from, like Bill said, if I watched something, it was like the CBS movie of the week might have been the first time that I saw The Sound of Music, or the first time that I saw, any of those big movies, right? And then eventually, you started renting VHS, which we did a lot. Then eventually you could buy VHS. And then, the 5%ers out there started buying Laserdisc. But then DVD kind of was the first format that was a lot like CD, where it's like, here's a really high quality at a good price point, and it had no competition at all. There was no streaming. There was nothing back then. So now if you look at the generations, like, I have a 20-year-old daughter. She doesn't know what I'm talking about with all this stuff. They've literally had, like, my 10-year-old and my 13-year-old, we talk about like, well, streaming isn't as good as physical media. But the thing is that streaming is really, really good and it's on demand. They don't have an appetite like we do, where I'm like, I know how bad Alien can look because I used to watch it on this, and then I watched it on that, and I watched it steadily get better and better and better. And I look at the 4K, and the thing is that in itself is a draw. Like watching the movies that we grew up with go from basically, like the super crap quality to like, I can't believe it could look this good. Where the generation that's, coming up behind us, people that are even in their 20s and honestly probably into their 30s, they've always had it good. Because, I mean, DVD was good and Blu-ray was good. And now it's like, streaming it's insane how good it is. I never would have thought it got as good as it is now. So that idea of having to own it, I think a lot of, like, again, people our age like to own something, but I think that's because it's like, oh my God, like I've always loved this movie and look at how good I can have it now. And we're so used to like, okay, but it might go away, or okay. And you already see that the arguments from people our age in the collectors group is like, yeah, but if they don't have it on physical media, like the digital people, they're going to take it from us and we're not going to have it anymore. And it feels like it's almost a paranoia thing that comes with that, because they're always afraid that it's going to be.
There is some truth.
Yeah, but there is absolutely some truth to that, because there has been there's been censorship of things, and things have been taken away. Recently, we've seen with Warner Brothers, right, where stuff has gone off HBO Max. So there is a fear.
But the same thing happens with physical media to a point, okay, they made this, but then they only made it for so long. And now if you want to buy it, you got to buy it on eBay for 10 times the price or get it, stuff like that. So, I mean, there's always been a thing where, and a lot of times if a movie is pulled, like if you're going to put it on, Max, or you're going to put it on Netflix or whatever, they're looking at viewership numbers, and it costs them money to have that on there. And if it doesn't make any sense to have it anymore, it's going to go away. So I don't see iTunes sitting there saying that, like, hey, I know you bought, Star Trek from us 5 years ago, but, so long. I haven't really seen a lot of that. I've seen streaming services, video on demand doing that. But I still feel like that's driven in part a little bit by that fear of like, oh, but they're going to come
Sure.
and take it and stuff like that. But I mean,
Well,
there is
it's
I don't know.
100%. I mean, it is 100% a generational thing. I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah,
As I said earlier, the future is absolutely going to be digital. But to take your point to another level, it's also true that younger people just aren't as plugged into movies and television series as some of us were too.
they
Games
also have
occupy a much
1,000
bigger space
times-
in there.
But they have 1,000 times more things to watch. I mean, let's be honest.
Right.
Like, you're
Right.
getting to the point now where, we're at that point where TV series and stuff like that, it's like, it's hard to keep up just if you're a casual watcher, let alone somebody that really likes media. So, where we were like, okay, what is there to watch? And there was only so much of it, where they're like, they never have a problem with quantity.
It's
they have
overwhelming
access
to me.
to everything all the time. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
And to me, it's kind of sad in some ways. It's great how much content we have, but it's also kind of sad. You lost that water cooler discussion, right? Where everybody the next day at work was talking about this episode because there was only 3 networks, right? The finale of MASH or whatever. We're already without the tiniest bit of political commentary. We're so fractured, but even around our media, we're so fractured because we don't have all that communal shared experience anymore. And when we did our poll on HTE, we saw it was that 20 to 30. They said streaming is great, and it was the 40 and up that was carrying more my physical. Steve, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, and a lot of that water cooler discussion now is instead of is talking about the Sunday night movie. Now it's about like the new series that somebody's binge watching on Netflix or on Amazon Prime or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's so many of them. It's like when people do that to me anyway, it's like, no, I'm sorry, I haven't seen that. Nope, sorry, I haven't seen that. Nope.
Well,
I saw one of those.
Not only is there so many series, but there's so many different streamers, right? And that's one of the problems is there's 10, 15, different streamers if you get into the real deep stuff. And it's like the niche stuff. And it's too much. Nobody's got a budget to subscribe to that many. I mean, I think most people are probably, 3 or 4 at the most a month, that they subscribe to at once. And, they wait and find out, when this other streamer's got a whole bunch of shows they want to watch, and they cancel one and then they go subscribe to that for 2 or 3 months and then cancel that. And so you get all of this churn. And I think that's one of the problems that the studios have suddenly realized is there's just not a market. I mean, there's only 124, 25 million TV households in the US, and they're not all going to subscribe to 12 different streaming services, right? So there's a ceiling as to how much money they can make in this kind of a market with so many different, with every studio trying to compete with their own streamer. It's
Okay, so
ridiculous.
why don't we go ahead, Chris?
One last thing, but I do think that's actually an advantage, though. So I totally agree with you. There is too much, and I wondered early on, because streaming kind of was the thing that like everybody was like, I need to get away from cable because it's so expensive, and I'm going to go to streaming. And early on, it was like, oh, if you just had Netflix and maybe like one other thing, you pretty much covered all your bases for the most part. And now everybody's like, oh, well, let's have our own, and we're getting back to the cable model again. But where it's like, oh my God, if you want it all, you're going to pay a lot for it. But I think that, again, the one of the things that people are scared of is that streaming will never be as good a quality as physical, and if physical becomes less and less and less, streaming, like we're not going to get the quality. But I think the thing is that, as you said, picking and choosing streaming, like, well, what am I going to subscribe to? It becomes where they have to compete with each other more to try to get that dollar because somebody only wants to subscribe to 2 or 3 services as opposed to 10. That drives quality because you have, you know what I mean? I could see that where that's like, well, hey, why should I use Apple instead of Vudu instead of this? So it drives innovation, just like you're already seeing in the audio side. Like, why do I go to Apple Music instead of Tidal instead of, whatever, where you're seeing like, okay, well, we have lossless. Oh, okay, well, we have multi-channel lossless and we have that. I think that streaming will only get better. Not because I think that the masses need it, to be honest. Like, the regular 99% of people don't need it.
The regular 99% of people don't even care. Frankly.
They're already way, way past the quality they need. Yeah. But they still have to have something to separate them from the next people, and you'll get the marketing labels of that. So
Yeah,
I think streaming will continue to only get better and better as the technology improves and things like that.
for sure.
Okay, so I'm just going to take a quick break. To talk about generational things for station identification here. And then Steve, if you want to gather through some commercials and not commercials, I'm sorry, questions that are there.
Sure.
I'm going to stop here. I'm going to do one little 30 seconds worth of promotion, and then we'll come back. And I think that's a great thing to come back to, is talking about streaming versus physical. Because, boy, if you want to get an argument started in a forum, that's one where to go. So let's come back to that. I'm going to do a little bit about TSR real quick, and then maybe a couple of questions, and let's get into that part of the discussion. So I'm going to share this real quick, and a little bit about us, the Screening Room. We sponsored this podcast, so I'm reserving a little section here to talk about us a little bit. We're all about helping people make informed decisions about AV products and what to buy. Certainly, it's hard to separate truth from the fiction out there, all the noise. A lot of online reviews, a lot of online commentary that just parrots marketing claims or overhypes the latest shiny new toy. The cats are, I hear the cat making commentary.
That's Charlie here. Sorry.
It's Charlie, that's good. I'm glad
Here,
Charlie's making an appearance.
Here's
But
Charlie.
there's certainly, I see lots of people casting out to forums for opinions, and you get back a bunch of conflicting opinions. So what the Screening Room is all about, we invest in controlled testing and consulting with industry experts like Bill and Kris here, who really know what they're talking about, so that we know what we're talking about. We always want to make sure we have the best available data. Kris and Bill, you can certainly hear that they are really tied into what's going on. So the TSR approach is to test products under controlled conditions. We want to make sure we're passing on honest, reliable information to our customers. We did a double-blind speaker test back in April. We did a laser projector shootout last year. It was an interesting thing. We had a $6,000 projector outperform a $27,000 projector, and we published that, even though that's not exactly in our best business interest, but we want to make sure we're pushing out good information. And if you were looking for somebody to help you out with the home theater system, our TSR approach is to make sure we're putting out good information to you, and so that you can trust what you're telling you based upon actual empirical testing that we do. Kris is often involved with some of those tests. So we do have a YouTube channel. It's linked to at the bottom of this webcast. We're going to publish this to YouTube after we're done with it here. And we do have a Facebook page, so please like and follow us, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about anything you heard us talk about today, or any other stuff that has to do with audio, video, and home theater. So with that, back to Steve. Do you have anything with us on the question side that might be fun? And then I'll take a look at the Screening Room feed too.
Yeah. Just a few comments that I think are interesting points of discussion. Iglesias said, there's definitely a market for all formats. It should be celebrated as a win to the consumer, and I think there's some truth to that we kind of all get some choices, right? If you love physical, you can still buy physical. If you like the convenience of streaming, you can still you can do that, obviously.
Yeah.
And then I think let's see here. Charles also says that streaming is a bubble that's about to burst and it's unsustainable. So that's why we're seeing some of these mergers. I think some of what we're seeing is with some of these price increases are that delivering streaming is more expensive, maybe than they thought it would be over when you start looking at huge numbers.
I just wanted to add really quick. That's a good point about mergers. I think you are going to see some mergers. I think you're going to see some studio mergers. I think you're going to see some streaming mergers. I think you might see a couple streamers go away. I definitely think the next 3 or 4 years is going to see some consolidation in the market.
Go ahead. Sorry, Steve.
Yeah, that's another question I have is, we've all seen the social media posts go around about how little artists make on Spotify, compared to a couple of the other services. It's in like the fractions of a penny per play. I think the last one I saw was like 0.0012 cents per play or something like that. And obviously the benefit there is, low per play price, but the benefit there is that they can get exposure to the whole world, which is something tough for a small artist to do, obviously.
Sure.
But what's going to happen with, with movies, with some of these services, are the prices going to have to go up?
I don't know. That's a good question, and probably, and just in terms of the idea of how much do artists make from streaming, whether it's music or movies. Look, we've just seen a massive strike with the writers and with the actors that are just finally now resolved. Just today or yesterday, I think the SAG-AFTRA strike has ended. But
Yeah.
that was one of the big sticking points, because I was watching an interview with Tony Gilroy, who's the showrunner for Andor on Disney Plus, and someone was asking him, well, how is your show doing? Is it as popular as, say, The Mandalorian or whatever? And he goes, well, the truth is, I don't know, because Disney won't tell us. Disney won't tell us how many people are watching each of these different shows. So he goes, we have no idea. We have no idea. And I think that's one of the big sticking points. And I'll be curious to see what the resolution of that is in terms of, does that data get shared with talent? That's one of the problems.
Speaking of Disney, go ahead. Sorry.
So going back to what Steve said, I've always heard that thing of like, okay, let's say, I don't know, Taylor Swift. She's in everything, right? Let's say she gets a penny per stream. She probably doesn't even get a penny per stream, but let's just say she did, right?
Right.
So everybody goes like, oh, wow, she's not making that much per stream and stuff like that. Well, back in the day with CD sales, right? So one, you had to be able to have it where people could buy the CD, so there's, how many stores had the CD, how much did the CD cost, how many people could afford to buy the CD. I think they made like $1 usually per thing. I think remember TLC when it talked about like how they could be the best selling artist of the year and still be broke. So I look at it as like, yeah, a penny doesn't sound like much, or half a penny or a tenth of a penny. But with the streaming services, the odds are that artist, like the convenience of it and the literally how many millions and millions of people that subscribe to them, they're probably making more money even off of that little bit than they ever were from a CD, because once you bought the CD, they were never making $1 off or a penny or anything else off of it. Where with streaming, nobody owns it. You're literally just, every time I push play on my artist, you know what I mean? Like if I like Taylor Swift and I just listen to one of her albums, let's say I don't care. I don't even know her albums, but let's say that's the album and I love that album and I always listen to that album. If I went to Target and I bought that album, she made $1.50. But if over the next 5 years, that's on a heavy rotation on my Apple Music list, I guarantee you she made more money off of that, me playing it from that, than she did on there.
Well, streaming,
that's a good point.
Whoever controls the music rights made that money. The question is the accounting fair and transparent all the way around, right?
Yeah, but that's all stuff that like the artists have to work out with the studios that own it and stuff like that. And that's why you see strikes and things like that.
Right.
I do agree that the merger of things, I when the streaming stuff came along, when Paramount had to have theirs and Warner had to have theirs and all that, I was sitting there thinking about stuff like, how does Paramount think that they have enough of content in their umbrella to justify having something like that? Where like Netflix, yes, like they have their own content, but obviously they license a ton of things and stuff like that. So that made more sense to me. And so the idea of doing these mergers, or even going back to the thing of like, I'm still surprised we don't have, when like Apple TV came out, that it was like literally their version of Netflix where they're I mean, they do some licensing. You see some movies in there and stuff like that, but like where you're going to get media giants where you pay a subscription thing. So instead of Vudu being a rental or buy system, or iTunes being a rental or buy system, at some point, I think we will start to see the merger of, I have a subscription to Apple TV Plus and they have all of these libraries and stuff, just like you see with music. I think that eventually it's going to become that model. I just feel like everything always eventually parallels it, and we'll get to like where it's like, do I have Spotify, Apple Music or whatever, but now it's, Videofy and Apple TV, and stuff like that.
I think you're right. I think it should go in that direction. And I think if it did, it would be good, because then
I think it's the only way it'd be viable in the long term.
Because see, that was in the physical media days, in like the early days of DVD, that was the advantage of Netflix or Amazon, is you could just go to one or the other and you knew you could get anything that you wanted. And when your streaming service of choice it has that same convenience, then I think it'll be a better deal.
And they can have their own original content. And the thing is as they become bigger and bigger, hey, Warner wants to make a title to put on ours as an exclusive or whatever, you know what I mean? Then people are making content for that, just like they do for TV and stuff. It's like, hey, we really want to have content on your channel. How can we get it?
Yeah.
So.
Does the Spotify or Apple Music model really work for movies though? Because we all listen to music and albums, hundreds or thousands of times, but does anybody watch movies more than a few times or a few times a year or something like that? So does that model really work?
I think that's one of those questions that we have to see. I mean,
Yeah.
Well, I just saw a couple of. There's quite a few questions in the TSR thread.
Yeah.
That's the one that Bill linked to. Let me just hit 1, 2, and then let's talk about streaming versus physical thing.
All right, I got a prize for the first guy that you quote out for a question. Who is it?
It was a Dan Rodelli, I think. I'm sorry, it's flowing by me so quickly. I just want to get caught up. We're asking about he's got a couple in here. They were asking about what Disney also has in the pipeline now that we get the Cameron stuff coming out, and of course, inevitably, we're asked anything about Star Wars original versions, which is the eternal question, right?
I can talk a little bit about that. The Star Wars original versions are not going to happen as long as George Lucas is alive. That's pretty much. But the truth is, if you want to see those original versions, there's a group that's sort of unofficially doing the 4K 77, 4K 80, 4K 83. If you want to see those original versions, you can find them. You can get them. But as far as Disney, the main thing that's happening right now is that these Cameron titles. So it's Abyss, True Lies, and Aliens, and Disney is working on those right now. And those, they were originally supposed to be out on the same day as Titanic, and I think Disney realized it was going to take a little bit longer. So I don't know if they're going to make it out in time for the end of the year, but if not the end of the year, then they're certainly going to be out early next year, and they're definitely being worked on. And my understanding, my expectation is that they're going to get announced in the next 6 to 8 weeks or so. And they're going to be done really well. All three of those titles are going to be on 100 gig discs. They're going to have Dolby Vision, HDR, Dolby Atmos audio. I think the desire or the target, the goal is to have as much of the previous extras carry over as possible, because like True Lies and The Abyss never even were released on Blu-ray. So there's a demand for those titles. And so I think
pent up demand for sure.
Yeah. So I think they'll be done good. And beyond that, it's like, so I think it's up in the air. I think my hope is that Disney's going to look at like how much money they made on Snow White and Cinderella, how much money they made on this first round of sort of Disney Plus streaming series, Loki, WandaVision, and The Mandalorian season 1 and 2. They're going to look at Prey. They're going to look at Titanic, which they own the international rights to. They're going to look at the sales of these 3 Cameron titles when they come out. My hope is that they're going to look at that and go, oh, wow, we should continue. And I do know that they plan to continue the Disney Plus stuff. So you're going to see more next year. You're definitely going to see more of the Disney Plus streaming series in 4K and Blu-ray. But beyond that, it's up in the air.
Okay, that's a great answer. Just going back to remasters and stuff like that, we're talking about. There was a comment in here about, and it seems like we had originally when things were coming out on Blu-ray, we had the heavy DNR noise reduction.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, nobody likes that. Let's retain the grain. Now it seems like we're starting to see it again. Somebody was commenting. I've noticed a couple of films collector's editions of films, 4K transfers.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, they've scrubbed it, and I thought that was a dead thing. Do you have any inside knowledge on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's weird because in the early days of Blu-ray, there were a lot of guys who'd worked on Laserdisc who just hated grain. Like I know people in the industry who were, they hated grain, so DNR and edge enhancement were things that they just dialed up automatically. And now I think they're starting to realize more and more that okay, you can't just scrub all the grain out. People will get mad if you do that. But it still happens occasionally. And then, like digital noise reduction is actually a legitimate tool that gets used in remastering to even out grain levels. The problem is when it's used excessively to just scrub grain out completely. I mean, I think it's a case by case basis. I think people that are working on 4K remasters now, for the most part, are aware that people care about that a lot. But it still happens occasionally.
it's as in so many things, is there a happy medium, right? It's like
Yeah.
where you revisionism versus fixing things that the filmmakers wanted to fix if they could.
Right.
Like I said, these 4K scans of the OCN, the original camera negative, is revealing things we never saw before.
Yeah, sometimes contractually, like I know that there are cases where there are some actresses who, their faces get polished digitally by contractually, and so it's kind of a weird thing all around.
Well, I think this goes back to tech issues, though, too. So if you look at formats in general, VHS film grain wasn't an issue because you didn't have the resolution for film grain.
Yeah.
DVD, rarely did you have the issue of film grain because, again, you didn't have enough resolution. When you started getting into Blu-ray and they're doing better scans of movies, now you're at a resolution where film grain actually can be seen. And the problem with that is that it becomes a nightmare for the compression side. So you're trying to fit a movie and all these special features and stuff onto a disc. And it becomes harder and harder because film noise is random. So it's very hard to compress with random noise in there. And when we got to 4K, now film grain is extremely easy to resolve. And you're finding out that, especially stuff that was shot on certain ISOs where darker movies have just a ton of film grain, or certain 35 millimeter stocks used to have a ton of film grain and things and stuff on there that, it becomes a problem where it's like, if you want to preserve that, nobody saw it even when they saw it on film, not to that degree because you were how many negatives away or whatever.
Yeah.
So they're looking at it and they're going, okay, I realize that, that's there, but nobody ever really saw it to that extent. And on the 4K, man, you can really make it out. I mean, with Blu-ray, for a while, what they would do is they would actually scrub all of the grain away, and then they would add it back in digitally so that it made it look like it had film grain for the people that want that.
Right.
But it was a controlled film grain so that the compression would work properly.
Well, and it was also, and sometimes they were excessive. So they took all the grain out, but they took image detail out as well, right? Which is the problem.
Exactly. Yeah, because it's hard to do. Like it's probably some kind of frequency thing. Anything above this, it was like a high pass or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
There was some of the. I assume there's going to be some AI tools that might be able to do a better job of it, because in the audio field, like I'm in post production on my own feature right now, and it's amazing to me what I can do just like with this new Beatles thing, to isolate something out where there's the artifacts. Now, 5-10 years ago, the audible artifacts were there. They're now almost a thing of the past. It's almost magical.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I can tell you that the state of the art in remastering technology is moving so fast. I mean, it's shocking. It's really shocking how fast it's moving. And I think we'll all be the beneficiaries of that. I mean, is it right? Some of this early stuff is a little clumsy, but it's getting better and better and better. And it's shocking how fast that's happening.
Well, speaking of getting better and better and better, I'm going to say my little piece about streaming, and then see what everybody else thinks. I mean, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, and if somebody in my household said, "Let's watch this movie," and it was available on streaming, I would say, "No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to look at it," because I have projection systems.
Sure.
All of us here have projection systems. You blow it up to a 10, 11 foot wide screen. The compression artifacts were horrible. I have to say, streaming is quite good, and sometimes astonishingly good. I've got a lot of people who go on and on about how terrible the audio is, and this is my opinion on it. Most of the time, I think a lot of the streaming devices don't have very intuitive settings and setups, and they're dumbed down for a sound bar or the TV speakers itself. But if you have the actual correct bit stream coming out of your streamer, and you're getting a Dolby Digital Plus, Atmos stream, or whatever, it can sound really good too. Mm-hmm. I recently got Ready Player One and compared it to the Kaleidescape version. The Atmos mix is there, and it's lossless on the Kaleidescape, and it's lossy on the iTunes version. But darn, they were pretty darn close, especially once you level match them, because a lot of times the streaming has a lower audio level. Yeah. Because of Dolby's dial norm, you equalize that, and it's astonishing how good it gets.
Well, sometimes it depends on the studio itself too. Like Disney was notorious for a while there about really compromising. They would really compromise the Atmos mixes because they were shooting for that middle of the road audience rather than shooting for the enthusiast audience.
That was also on the disc though too, right? It was usually the same mix.
It's on the disc too.
Right, exactly. So now that's starting to change a little bit. They're starting to realize And they've recently, in the last year or two, they have been better. But yeah, for a long time, the Atmos mixes were very milquetoast on a lot of their 4K discs.
But this also brings up another thing. So let's say, I don't know, let's take a Pixar, like Cars. Cars. I know for a fact that if you buy the 4K of that, it's neutered on the bottom end. Like that low bass is gone. And people complain about the Atmos mixes and stuff like that. But the beauty of something like digital compared to disc is let's say that last year they released Cars in 4K for the first time, and it has this mix, and everybody's like, "Oh, I can't believe they did that." So, we're so used to like, well, let's just hope that next year they put out another version that's the super duper edition, and it has that. Where in digital, they literally can just be like, oh, okay, upload it.
They can fix it instantly. Yeah, you're right.
They can fix it, and it didn't cost you. You didn't have to buy it again to get.
Right.
How many times have you see the argument with Lord of the Rings? Like, I don't want the green edition. I want the other edition. Or something, or the Matrix with. I don't want the green one. I want the other one, or I don't want the teal mix of some movie or something like that.
It's a mixed bag, because that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
But then you get a case of like the French Connection that's streaming on the Criterion channel has had some of the language removed, scrubbed out by Disney.
That was a point that was just made. Yeah, excuse me. That was
was that Criterion though, or was that something that
was
Friedkin
Disney
wanted?
The version that Disney provided to Criterion to stream on the channel had been sanitized, had been intentionally sanitized, and that's the fear, because that can happen too. And
you read one of our viewers' minds, because that was exactly what they said. They're worried about not only the physical thing going away, and that what is going to be now streamed has some kind of changes or whatever into it. And you just directly spoke to that. I noticed my comment about the audio is already getting a whole bunch of controversial stuff. I could just say I've mixed about a dozen. They're all independent features. I'm no big time mixer, but I've prepared streaming mixes from the master that I've created losslessly and lossy to Dolby Digital Plus. And when you compare them, even on the studio setup, it's hard to hear any difference between them. Yeah. So I do think a lot of that has to do with setup. But yeah, we should do one of those blind listening tests like we're famous for, and compare them side by side with a group of people. I think that might be fun to do.
It's kind of what, like, some of you are familiar with Filmmaker Mode, which is an initiative that like the studios tried to do with a lot of display manufacturers to make sure that everybody was getting a consistent picture. It's kind of like that, right? It's the same thing. We need something similar for audio, but I think over time, as Kris said, the quality of this stuff is just all generally getting better and better. And so I think over time, these problems will tend to kind of go away. Like Kris, I think digital is inevitably the future. Right now, I think digital is very much taken the place of like the video rental store where you used to go out and rent a DVD or a VHS tape or whatever. Digital's taken the place of that, but eventually, and especially with younger generations, it's absolutely the way people consume everything.
And the other thing I'll say about streaming too is, and this is, it's a mixed bag depending on the streaming service. If I look like a Pluto or Peacock, picture and sound are not all that great, or it's just a 2-channel. They're not passing the surround mix. It's just stereo, right? And you got to pass it literally through old Dolby Pro Logic, or now Dolby Surround is the decoder, but it's a mixed bag. So I found on the major streamers like Max and Disney and Amazon or iTunes, usually you can get good picture and good sound, but some of those other ones, they are definitely a mixed bag. It's not consistently good. Well, so, Steve, did you have anything? You see those comments all the time.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny that you mentioned kind of technical quality and audio differences between platforms, because I think it was let's see, who was it here? It was I think it was Evan, actually, from the Home Theater Enthusiast. He mentioned that like the screeners that the studios send out to the reviewers are still stereo mixes. Is that true, Bill?
That's a pirating thing, though.
Yeah, that's usually on the talent side for like award season. The stuff that I get is all, it's either final product or it's a check disc of final product. So I get, for my review, for home theater review purposes, I get full quality stuff. But yeah, I mean, like award season, they'll send out, a lot of times they won't even send out Blu-ray. They'll send out just DVDs to actors
Well,
and directors.
the award stuff, the Academy is doing they literally have their own streaming app now that you have to have an account with because of the piracy thing. But I
Codes
also
and
think
stuff.
that, going back to what John said, the Pluto or, these streaming things, I mean, that's, again, we already talked about, they have to make money. And at the end of the day, I'm sure Netflix and, Max and stuff have, 100 times, 500 times more subscribers than those do. So they can't afford to have the quality and stuff like that. Like that, I think that just comes down to, like, at the end of the day, not every streaming company has 1 million subscribers where they're making, $20 million a month in membership fees to be able to afford H.265 or Atmos or whatever else. Like, they're just trying to get what they can get. And again, as we've seen, DVD was enough quality that it outsold Blu-ray and stuff. Like, you hit a point where the mass market, which is what all of them are going for, no matter what anybody says, if it's good enough for them, then they can make money off of it. So,
and we forget,
might not see that as an investment.
Yeah. And we also forget that we lived with NTSC television in this country for 50 years for a reason, right?
Well, look at DirecTV. I mean, it's still awful. Like, it's awful. Every time I go into a house to calibrate and they're like, "Oh, my cable, let's check my cable." And I'm just like, why? We know what it's going to look like, guys. We know it. If you want to like strip down your bandwidth and go look at a YouTube video in like not even 480p, like, that's probably giving DirecTV a run for its money at this point. But obviously they have people that still get it because, again, the content that's on there, and it's still quote unquote good enough despite all of that.
Well,
so
yeah, and the other thing we forget in this country is that we've got an infrastructure problem, right? Which there are a lot of places in this country that don't have fiber laid out.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of major cities, a lot of rural areas. Satellite's the only game in town, right? So it's until our infrastructure in this country improves, and it is slowly. But a lot of other places, have brand new infrastructure or newer infrastructure, and we are in the process of, here in the U.S., of upgrading our old infrastructure, and it'll take time.
So just another question popped in from our own Dave Carty. Just wanted to know if I picked teal and orange deliberately as my background. And yes, I did, because I am so sick of teal and orange grades. I rail about it all the time. It's like, why does every movie have to look exactly the same? Everything's teal and orange. So yes, I did the teal and orange thing very deliberately. Somebody was asking.
Before you get on that, I have one. Bill might know this. I was reading just random comments. In fact, I think they were talking about in the Blu-ray forum, they were talking about Aliens, that the fact that it might be coming out, and everybody's in there, trashing on Cameron for his, it's going to be a DNR mess like Terminator 2 was or whatever, or it's going to be teal. And it's interesting is everybody always says that, like, well, he really likes the teal, and we've seen that from actually a lot of different filmmakers where their new ones come out and they say, well, that's not the way it's supposed to look, that's revisionist. But the interesting thing there is, I would actually like to know, for somebody that actually works in production, if I looked at the original negative of Aliens, which nobody's ever seen, you know what I mean? Like, it's like Roger Deakins when he said that, people were saying, different stuff about digital versus watching stuff on film. And he's like, well, film is better if you're looking at the original negative, but me and the director are the only ones that ever saw that.
Yeah.
So, digital is better because it's more consistent. So I always wonder with some of these color timings, if they're like, well, no, that's the way I wanted it to look, but it could never look that way in theaters because, how many different, things that, generations away it was, and the wear and tear, and then the bulbs that they
It's not
used
just
in the
generations.
projectors.
It's sometimes with theatrical projection, you had different kinds of lamps, right? Like, and you had to color
lamps.
time
Xenon
prints for
lamp,
lamps.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like that was the case. That's exactly the case with the Lord of the Rings. Everybody talked about how the thing is ever too green or whatever.
Cast. Yeah.
But that is exactly the look that they were going for. It's just that during the process of production of those films, for the first couple of films, they didn't have those tools. That the digital tools for grading really kind of exploded during the making of that trilogy. So by the end, they had a lot more tools than they had early. So when they went back to go do the Blu-ray and then the 4K, they availed themselves, and that resulted in a look that was different, that freaked everybody out and got some people mad. But then the other thing is true too, is that people's memory plays tricks. Like, nobody remembers what the film looked like. I'm sorry, I don't care how good, unless you've got a photographic memory, you don't remember exactly what the film looked like in the theater. and your memory has been biased by Laserdisc, by DVD, by each format that you've seen. So it's kind of tricky. But I also wanted to address one point about Cameron, where they talked about Cameron loves his DNR. So the situation with Terminator 2 was unique. Cameron, like, there's a reason that Abyss and True Lies and Aliens, some of these things have taken so long, is because he's been very focused on, first of all, diving to the bottom of the ocean and then working on Avatar, right? So the T2 4K, the situation with that happened was, like, there was a beautiful 4K scan of that film, and I know people who've seen it said it's gorgeous, grain, everything, it's perfect. But what happened is when they went to put that film in theaters in 3D, in order to facilitate the 3D post-conversion process, they scrub all the grain out, right? Mm-hmm. So Cameron approved that master for use in 3D for theaters. And then what happened is Studio Canal, when they decided they were going to put a 4K disc out, they said, well, we've got this Cameron-approved master. We'll just use that. And in fact, when you put that first 4K in your player, there's a message that pops up talks about this 3D presentation, right? That master was never meant to be used for a 4K disc. It was just for 3D. But Studio Canal said, well, this is a Cameron-approved master, so it should be totally good.
That's interesting.
I can tell you, Lightstorm was not happy about that. But Studio Canal for years wouldn't acknowledge that they'd messed up. But so what I'm told now is that they are aware, and there is a plan. So next year, it just so happens is a major anniversary of the first Terminator. So I think that what I'm hearing is that after Abyss, True Lies, and Aliens are done and out, they're going to turn their attention next to T2 and the original Terminator. So I think you'll see next year that'll get fixed, and then Terminator will come out as well.
That's one of the things that's been interesting.
In teal, yeah.
One of the things I've enjoyed.
Editions.
Enjoyed talking to you about, Bill, about is sometimes you just find people tend to think that there's these like conspiracies going on behind the scenes, and lots of times it's just a laziness kind of thing like that, or not a laziness, it's just an omission. Somebody made a mistake. There's Jaws is one of my favorite all-time movies, and there's stuff in the Atmos mix that they just built that off of the 5.1 mix, which was missing stuff from the original mix. Yeah. It's just like they just automatically assume, oh, this was the most recent mix. It's got everything, without realizing there was problems with the previous one. It's not like anybody is planning these things.
Right.
They just happen.
I see all the time, oh, they're screwing us again. Oh, damn, they're totally screwing us. It's like, no, it's just, sometimes it's just knuckleheaded. Sometimes these people are overworked. They don't know any better. It's 9 times out of 10. There's nothing nefarious. There's never anything nefarious going on. It's just this is the world we live in, where it just stuff slips by. People don't see stuff. They don't catch stuff. It's like it really is just that stupid, frankly.
But we are in such
it's humans doing it. There's going to be, and they have a timeline and a budget and everything else. So,
and there are fewer humans doing it these days than there used to be, and the budgets are smaller these days than used to be.
Yeah.
So all the studios used to have in-house QC people, and now hardly any of them do. Now they all farm that out.
And what we have now is so much better than anything we've ever had in the past. It's just when you have some. All 4 of us have a little bit more of that time perspective than some of the younger viewers or listeners here. It's just like, holy cow, the quality of which I'm watching stuff now is so much better than anything that we lived in the past here. Somebody is asking here, do we know anything about Rocky being upgraded and why the Superman the movie did not get a new remaster? I don't know if you know anything about any of that.
Yeah, the Rocky and the Superman thing are problematic because both of those box sets came out in 4K and they had errors. There were audio errors and there were various problems. And I've tried to get the studio to acknowledge that and tried to get them to commit to say, well, yeah, we're going to fix it. I can't get an answer, so I don't know. Now I will say this is Warner Brothers I'm talking about.
Right.
And so when 2001: A Space Odyssey came out in 4K, there was a problem with one of the shots on the 4K disc where it was the scene where Dr. Floyd is visiting with the Russian scientists on the space station. They have this conversation and the scene ends, and then the story moves on. You see the space journey continuing to the moon and stuff. Well, between that end of that conversation and the next shot of the spaceship, it's supposed to be a dissolve, or a fade to black and then a fade up. I think something to that effect. And on the 4K, it was just a cut. And some people caught it, but it was one of those things. Most people kind of overlooked it. But what I found out later is, the studio never acknowledged that it was an error. What I found out later is I bought another copy of that film a year later, and sure enough, it had been fixed. So
Be interesting to see with the Kaleidescape. I have to look at that on the Kaleidescape
look
version.
at the Kaleidescape, and it'll be interesting to see if, typically a studio will say, yes, we messed up. Sorry. Here's how you get your replacement disc. Warner hasn't been doing that.
Let's talk about Kaleidescape real quick. I know talk about something we publish. Somebody writes a comment about Kaleidescape and how they're thinking about getting one. And boy, talk about that's just as, if not more controversial than the whole streaming thing.
Yeah.
Chris and Steve and I are all big fans of Kaleidescape. I know they had approached you, Bill, at one point, and you were never able to see eye to eye, but Chris has had some good conversations with them.
I have one. I have a Kaleidescape, and I've used it, and I'm certainly familiar with it. I don't use it regularly, but I've certainly used it, and it's tremendous in terms of quality. There's no doubt.
In terms of picture quality and in terms of something that just works. I mean, it just works. And at this point in my life, I just want stuff that just will work.
Yeah.
But you don't usually have the special features, but they do upgrade in quality over time. Those upgrades will come. I don't think any one of us would argue that it's the greatest value in the world, but in terms of just the convenience of streaming, in terms of the quality of physical, sometimes maybe even slightly better. Chris or Steve, did you have any? Because people have always asked about.
Yeah, I mean the online forum discussions always blow up, and it makes people angry, and I think there's the people who have it who love it. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that they bought a Kaleidescape and they didn't love it.
And regretted it.
Yeah.
So you've got those people, and then you've got the sort of people like me that are just just disappointed that more people can't afford it. And then there's the people that are just angry that are like, well, I can build a PC for $2,000 and rip my discs, and it's fourth of the cost, and it just doesn't make any sense. It's stupid.
I look at, just interject briefly, I look at Kaleidescape as kind of like buying a Tesla Roadster. Like right now it costs a lot of money, but like Chris said, the quality of all the streaming stuff is getting better and better and better. So what I expect is that at some point in the future, either Kaleidescape will be more affordable, we'll have a more affordable option, or all of the other services will raise their game up to that level, and then it will become more affordable. Tesla, like Tesla, like the early Teslas, Kaleidescape to me is a super early adopter enthusiast. It's a very, very niche product targeted to a very, very niche audience, but it's pioneering that capability to have much better quality that I think will trickle down into lots of stuff.
Yeah, and we love it, and certainly we'll never talk somebody out of it who's interested in one.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful thing. Once you get used to it, it's hard to go back to anything else. It's amazing how much it seems like a pain to load in a disc. And of course, a lot of people will say, "Well, I'm using Plex and Zappiti, and technically we're at the end of our hour and a half. Do we want to go maybe for another 5 or 10? Or are you guys ready to?"
I can do another 5 or 10, and then I probably have to take off. But
okay. Maybe we should hit on Zappiti going out, or Zappiti, however you want to pronounce it. They left the market. That was kind of a platform. I have one in my rack right over here. It's kind of nice for ripping content. There's people who use the Plex. Chris, you had some thoughts on Plex recently. Did you want to share some of those?
Well, I kind of already talked about it a little bit earlier. I think I mentioned the fact that, I could see the studio system kind of coming after that kind of stuff next. But, it actually goes right into what you were talking about before with Kaleidescape. You see the people talk about, I have Plex, I could do everything Kaleidescape can do at a fraction of the cost. But that's actually not true. Now, I'm not, Kaleidescape is expensive. There's no way to get around that. Like the cost of entry for the hardware is really high. It was a system that was designed for the application of kind of cost no object theater systems. I'm sure that, probably one of their biggest, selling points is like the yacht industry and stuff, where people want to have their collection available to them in multiple rooms in those kind of environments and stuff. But a Plex and a Kaleidescape aren't the same thing, because Kaleidescape is one, disc quality, just like Plex if you're ripping them 1-to-1 or whatever. But the problem with Plex is you have to have the content to be able to rip. And we're seeing more and more that these studios are not releasing anything unless it's, Marvel, Star Wars, Star Trek. I mean, yeah, you're getting like the A-list, catalog stuff, but, even stuff that I would think that'd be like, oh, this will probably come out on 4K, doesn't come out on 4K a lot, where, streaming systems like iTunes and Kaleidescape are getting the majority of their new release content is 4K. So I actually got into it because of that, because I like summer tentpoles as much as the next guy. I like popcorn movies, but I also love dramas, indies, foreign, everything. I'm a movie lover, and Kaleidescape is the only place that I can get that quality while at the same time, 4K at disc quality or better, where I can't get that from iTunes or anything else, and I can't get it from disc unless it's those kind of titles. So there's the time and everything else, but if you look at Kaleidescape is an interesting kind of doomsday message. Kaleidescape started off real early on as just a way to take your physical discs and put them into a slot loading machine or server at a really expensive price and give you an interface so that you didn't have to keep on loading your disc. They were a lot like Windows Media was kind of back in the day, a long time ago for people that remember that. And the thing is that that's all it was. They had these big, carousel things that you stuck a disc in, and it would either play it or it would rip it and then play it back from the digital file, but you had to have the disc in there and stuff like that. Well, eventually they got taken to court for that because they were ripping discs. Even though you had the disc and you had to have the disc in there, that was their thing. But as we saw, they actually went out of business for like 72 hours. I think it was like over a weekend or something like that.
Yeah, I think it happened a couple of times. Yeah.
But now, and some people still talk about that as like, well, I don't know if I want to invest in Kaleidescape. What if they go under again? But the thing is that is a completely different company than they are now, because now they are a digital marketplace. They are literally working with all of these studios to provide content. It is to the studio's advantage to do it. They lose nothing. They're giving these files to everybody else. It's just another revenue stream that costs them no more than any other revenue stream does.
Right.
But the Plexes of the world and things like that, they are relying on you ripping it. Now, granted, Plex isn't providing that software, but it is a means to an end. And it also is something where, like, if I'm ripping my content and saying, hey, I have it on Plex, Plex gives me the ability to share that with other people and things like that. So I'm not saying that the writing's on the wall for these things. They'll be around. This has always been around and will continue to be around in one form or another. But I would be a lot more worried about next week Plex saying, we have to shut down because we have a multi-million-dollar lawsuit from whoever, the DVD, the Blu-ray Association, Hollywood or whatever, before Kaleidescape is ever going to close their door because of any other issue or things like that. So Zappiti is a great example of, they probably got a lawsuit that they're like, we can't even afford to litigate, at this point, because bringing in lawyers, even if you think you can win, costs, thousands, if not, up to $1 million. And companies like that, as soon as that comes in the door, they're like, well, shit, I mean, we can't even afford to get into the courtroom with, these kind of people.
Yeah.
So I would be more worried about that, because those are, regardless of your intention and what you do, most people that are using those are using some kind of pirating stuff or whatever. Because I mean, even to rip your content, you are essentially breaking, copyright laws, whether or not you're like, yeah, but I'm just using it for me or not. We all know that still doesn't really fly. So Zappiti is, could be a first domino. It might not. I mean, I don't like to be the doom and gloom guy, but
I should point out too that Kaleidescape works within the system and has very good security.
Exactly.
To the point that the studios actually trust them with the original mezzanine files for those films, right?
Correct.
So it's Kaleidescape. I don't see any chance that as Kaleidescape develops a more affordable hardware product, I could see them frankly getting bigger, not smaller.
Unfortunately,
I agree.
We see them actually raising the prices, but they're trying to improve the value.
See, I think
value proposition in other ways. One thing I will say, Kaleidescape, they're having sales on movies, which when I first got into it, they never had. Now you can do sales on movies, and the disc to digital thing is insane.
Yeah.
Every week there's some kind of promotion, and I went in 100 discs I loaded into a drive, It read them all, and I upgraded most of those, literally from DVD quality, a lot of those titles, to the latest 4K version for about $4.
Well,
You know?
and iTunes does that too. If you own
Yeah.
movies in your iTunes library, they automatically upgrade it to 4K when a new 4K is available. But
Well-
I mean, I think Kaleidescape is a great product. it's not. Most of my audience is not in the target, and I've got an audience of enthusiasts, but most of them aren't. It's still too pricey for the average consumer when you can just buy an Apple TV, box or a Roku box or whatever, and that's much more,
I think it's telling.
We
though.
get it.
I sometimes I try to look at it as like, well, is it telling us something more though? Kaleidescape charges a lot for their hardware. We all know that, but I have to either believe one of two realities with that. Either one, they were always charging a lot for their hardware back in the day, so they just like that model because it's worked for them, and stuff. But I also wonder now that they've moved to a digital marketplace, if again, like, what is the cost that the studios are providing? So, like, if they're selling movies, which is what they do, they have rentals, but they're mostly a selling service.
yeah.
So if I sell Titanic for, let's say, $20 on Kaleidescape in the movie library, how much cut is that studio taking of that sale? That has to have hardware costs as high as it is because they can't make money off those movies. So is it the
It's a good question.
studios driving that price up, or is it just because they're like, because we all know that hardware doesn't cost anywhere near that. But
Right.
if that's the only way they can make movies because studios charge a lot for them, it is what it is, right?
Well, it's kind of like popcorn and soda at the movie theater, right?
Yeah.
That's where all the
Which
money
is-
is made.
Yeah, and it might be the reason that there's nobody else other than Kaleidescape, because everybody else might have looked at it and said that, like, how this is an unsustainable
It could be
model.
It could very well be.
or something like
my
that.
suspicion is it's a little of both. My suspicion is a little both. I think they are used to catering to a very exclusive high end market, and they like that. But I think also it is. Yeah, it could very well be that it costs a lot. A lot of money on that side too.
Because as soon as you
So
bring
why
it
do-
down, you technically devalue your brand. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
It's a
as soon
luxury.
as they
It's a
start
luxury
saying,
product for a luxury audience.
Right.
right? Yeah, and as soon as you start bringing and milking it down, then you could lose that upper end audience
Right.
just simply because of the fact that they're like,
Exclusivity.
okay, well now it's not
But
as
I-
special as it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I tried to tell him when I was talking with him is like, look, I get that, if you can just come down a little bit, like if you can target
I
target
agree.
an audience that's like, rather than $2,000 for a player, make it $1,000 or make it $800. You don't have to go all the way down to a mass market product, but if you just make it a little bit more affordable, you'll dramatically increase your audience. A lot of
Wait,
people
they have
will.
$2,000 players? Steve,
Yeah.
you didn't
Yeah,
tell me they
whatever,
had $2,000
maybe
players.
whatever it is. Yeah, I mean,
They're starting
it was
quite a
like-
bit higher than that.
Yeah. Okay. So to me, that's what. Yeah. That's. I mean, I said, listen, if you can get down to like a $2,000 price point,
Yeah.
then suddenly you get a much larger audience. You get a much
Yeah,
larger audience.
I told them exactly the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Steve
so have
actually
I.
did some marketing.
We've
for
all had these
Kaleidescape.
meetings.
Yeah, because my audience on the bits is a super enthusiast market, and
Yeah.
most of that audience can't afford a Kaleidescape.
We get it.
Yeah.
We
Preaching
get
to the
it.
choir. Yeah. We know it.
So, if we can kind of just want to make sure questions came in, people just asked, what about the future hardware? But we kind of already covered that. We don't know of anybody coming out with a new player. Some of these, did Revon and Magnetar ever go
away.
anywhere, or did those things just kind of die on the vine?
I think they're out there. I think they're out there still,
Yeah.
but they're targeting like the high end, like Oppo kind of player. They're
Yeah.
kind of the high end
$500 Blu-ray player.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But there's a market for that. See, that is a price point that a lot of people, you get it's a player that'll play everything. It's high end. It's high quality, right? Like there is a market for a price point. That's not a mass market, but a $2,000 player is not outside the realm of,
So Mark
feasibility.
Zutkoff asks here, Bill, this would be for you. Do you have any idea how much the retail exclusives like the Steelbooks and anything have helped or hurt the physical market? But you kind of addressed that in terms of it was a guaranteed sell-through, right, for
Yeah.
the studio.
I think it certainly helped. It certainly gives the studios. It has given the studios a reason to go. Oh, we know for sure we're going to make a profit on this title. So not only can we do the exclusive, on top of that we can do the wide title. So yeah, it's from a studio standpoint, it made a lot of sense. And I do think a lot of those exclusives will end up going to Walmart and Amazon. And then I think some of the smarter studios are also going to start doing their own kind of online space, not unlike Shout Factory. And when you buy from Shot Factory, you buy from Amazon, you can get the title. You buy from Shot Factory, you get maybe special cover art, a poster, some additional swag, maybe a steel book, whatever it might be. I mean, the options will still be there, I think, because that market there are people who really do love the steelbook thing.
So
well,
I'm
the
just going
steelbook thing is still just a licensing deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same disc that's in there. They just said, hey, we'll do a Steelbook. The company Steelbook said, hey, could we do a run of these?
Yeah.
And stuff like that.
And we'll hire an artist to do some cool poster or whatever it is.
Right. It costs the studio literally zero.
Yeah, very little. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to try to run through the questions. We're and the way Facebook works here, it looks like some of the older questions have dropped off. So if anybody has a question that we didn't address, please feel free to reach out to us at info@thescreeningroomav.com, and we'll try to pass it on. I'm sorry that we had a lot to talk about today. A couple of people complaining about Rocky, that they would, there's a sale loss for Warner Brothers because they're not going to buy it until they fix it.
I'm trying to push them behind the scenes to get them to fix that, and the Superman
it's not
thing.
your responsibility, Bill.
No, I know, but I want that to be fixed and correct as much as everybody else. I mean,
Yeah. So let's see. Steve, do you have? I'm looking through to make sure there's nothing kind of major we're missing here. Steve, did you find some?
Yeah, a few people have kind of started dropping off already, but clearly there's people interested in physical, people interested in streaming. Those are the kinds of comments I think. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, it's the what about something like the old Columbia House Video Club? Could that even work today? That's kind of an interesting question. I remember.
I think if a studio did it, like if Paramount had a Paramount, thing or whatever, where it's like, hey, become part of our thing. I actually was surprised. I don't know. Bill would probably know the answer to this. I think for a while there were studios releasing stuff where through Amazon where they would actually burn it to a disc to send to you, as opposed to making it like that.
Yeah, it was manufacturing on demand, and now they've switched. So it's actually kind of like a burned disc, right?
Yeah.
But now it's actually it's actually proper disc replication, just done in very small batches. They might do 1,000 or they might do 5,000.
See, I could see that, because again, that becomes almost like the Arrow thing. I mean, obviously those are going to be, they probably have a licensing agreement to only run so many of them, but then they're paying the studio for that right. So, but I could see studios doing something where they sell direct and using something like that, where they don't have to print as many, and then, maybe doing something like the Columbia model or something like that. So.
Yeah, and the bottom line is if they were to talk to their audience, if they were kind of to sort of cater to that audience and develop that audience, you could end up in a situation like Criterion. For a long time, people would buy a Criterion title. It didn't matter what it was. They just buy it because they knew it was Criterion. And if that kind of attention and quality is being given to the titles, you can develop a very loyal audience for sure.
Yeah, actually, we've seen kind of a microcosm of that with like concert Blu-rays, because they typically produce those in pretty small quantities, and so that might be around Amazon for maybe 6 months or a year, and then they're gone, and then the only place to buy them is to pay 3, 4, 5 times the price on eBay.
Yeah,
go to Kaleidescape. A lot of concerts.
Yeah, there's a lot of concerts on Kaleidescape. And I just want to say the one thing, there's almost 1,000 titles on Kaleidescape that aren't available on disc in 4K. Yeah. But then again, to be fair, talking about those boutique labels, there's a lot of those kind of more obscure films that I enjoy, or not obscure, but more culty type titles that I enjoy that are available on disc in 4K but are not on Kaleidescape.
Well, I mean, in companies like some of the independent companies, the boutique companies don't work with Kaleidescape, right? So I don't think Criterion. Last I heard, Criterion isn't on there. That kind of thing.
No, they're not.
Some people have asked me about that lately. It can't. So Criterion doesn't own those movies.
Right.
They license them.
Well, they license
Criterion. Yeah, they don't own, let's say Train Spotting's coming out.
Correct.
They don't own Train Spotting. They licensed it. Kino doesn't own any of those movies. Correct. They licensed it. Arrow does. So,
but for example, Criterion has the Janus Films library, but the Janus Films library isn't on Kaleidescape.
Right. So most of the titles that people complain about, though, that are like, hey, I just saw that, again, Beastmaster or The Last Starfighter, Arrow's putting that out. Why is that not on Kaleidescape? Well, Arrow can't go, hey, Kaleidescape, we got this good 4K master of that. That's up to the studio that licensed it to Arrow or whatever. And in some cases, it's pretty obvious. Like there's some cases where they're like, they obviously have an exclusivity deal. Like True Romance. True Romance is a great one. Arrow put that out. We haven't seen that on Kaleidescape, but like Arrow also put out Wild Things. But then like 2 weeks later, it was on Kaleidescape in 4K. So obviously Sony, Columbia Pictures, had a different deal with them. Or like Kino, the Great Escape and the No Name trilogy is in 4K on Kaleidescape. But then there's a bunch of other titles that aren't. So MGM, I think, owns those titles. Obviously, they had a deal with that. Or like Silence of the Lambs with Criterion. It's on 4K HDR on Kscape, but the only way to get it on disc is Criterion. So I think that has more to do with the deal that the studio made with the licensor.
But that's not.
But
unlike...
I always look at, why does it have to be one or the other? I have an Oppo sitting right next to my Kaleidescape. If I want to have it, buy it on the format you want. I always feel like everybody's like, well, it's either one or the other. I'm like, well, I can have all of these things at once and just enjoy it all, right?
Right. Yeah, people do tend to have kind of a binary way of thinking about that. But
I
mean,
it's either this or that. Yeah.
The different deals you're talking about, the licensing deals, that's not unlike the situation that exists with streaming already. With some things are on Netflix, some things are on Amazon, some things are. That's just the nature of it.
Yep.
Like
they just jump around. Yeah.
So a couple of quick. I think we probably ought to wrap this up. Steve, did you have any last questions there? I had a couple here. Any thoughts on how international markets would affect future of digital media or physical media? And then there was where sometimes the retail exclusives can be frustrating from consumers, where one retailer has this set of features and another retailer has a different set of features. That's a frustration being expressed.
Yes, and
that's just market competition.
Yeah, and again, it's a licensing thing, right? And it's just like what we were talking about with Kaleidescape, with all the streamers. It's like everybody gets their own kind of exclusive deal, and it's frustrating. That in terms of the physical media side, that is the best argument in the world for having an all-region Blu-ray player. Which get an all-region Blu-ray player because odds are something that the title that you want is available somewhere. And you can probably get it at least. It gives you more options anyway.
Steve, did you have any last minutes there? And then we'll do a little tag.
Yeah, one geeky question, and this is a question I have actually. Evan from Home Theater Enthusiast said, NVIDIA Shield has a Dolby level matching feature. Any more info on what that does, guys? And I'm guessing that has something to do with dial norm. And that's metadata, right, in the stream. And this is probably one of the most common misconceptions is people will compare a disc and then they'll compare the same stream. And the big difference is that there's about a 9 dB difference or something, John?
Yeah, 6 to 12, depending on how it's mastered.
Yeah. So they'll just switch sources and they'll play the stream on an Apple TV or an NVIDIA Shield, and then conclude that the disc is so much more dynamic when really it's just louder. That's it.
It's just, you got to level match. That's the key to audio testing and your memory we talked about before. So
well, they use that like
have you heard anything about that, Kris?
Well, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. Like Apple, I think, has a thing called sound check or whatever. You see constantly people complain about in streaming, especially because a lot of things are ad-based services. So like Hulu, great example. If I'm going to watch a movie on Hulu, I start it. If I have the one where you still have ads or whatever, you're watching it. Then all of a sudden the commercials come on and they're like insanely louder than that. So you're like, you got to crank the volume down. Then the movie starts, so you got to crank it back up. So I think that what happens is these streaming services, regardless of what they are, apply some type of normalization so that your volume level is consistent from one to the next, where on discs, they don't really do that. And we've all known that over the years that some discs are hotter than others or whatever. Yeah. So
different streaming services have different levels. They're all over the map.
You're never bouncing like in discs. You're not sitting there like I was watching this and then you get to the credits and it says, hey, starting in 5 seconds is something you didn't want to watch, and it goes right to that, and they want it to be normalized, where on a disc, you're always taking the disc out, so they don't have to worry about that kind of stuff.
And the FCC tried to regulate some of that, on broadcast services, but that's all out the window with streaming.
It's just streaming services. When Margot and I watch, on our smaller system up in the living room at night, they're all over the place. I'm constantly having to adjust the volume, switching between services. That's very frustrating.
And I wouldn't be surprised if the bass roll-off stuff. John, you and I have had conversations with literally mixers in Hollywood that talk about the fact that all film mixes technically are only supposed to go down to 30 hertz. That's where
That's all
the
they're
cinema
monitoring is
standard
down to about 30 hertz. That's all they're
so,
monitoring to. So anything gets below that, they didn't actually hear when they were mastering the film.
they look at it as noise. So in some
Slop,
cases we got that noise, in some cases we didn't, but it was never something that they were actually like, okay, we want, you know what I mean? Like that they were looking in a mastering room with that. And I think by including that, especially again in streaming where more people have wireless speakers, sound bars, or listening through it to a TV, the more information you have down there, the more chance of blowing speakers, you're hearing resonance inside the cabinets that you're using and all the other things. So yes, it works against us and everything like that. For the people that heard that and like it, that have systems that are capable of it. But at the end of the day, this whole thing that they're robbing you is something, it's an interesting argument because, again, talking to people that do film mixes and them saying that, like, well, technically it was really never supposed to, it was never actually, it was like the old, the DVD thing or Blu-ray thing with the blacker than black and whiter than white, like that information is there, but it was actually never really supposed to be there. It's the overshoot.
Yep.
So
that's a good way to describe it. Overshoot,
maybe that's another thing of that. Yeah,
that's a good place to go out because it's one of the one of the podcasts we want to do is to have one or two of those mixers on and talk about that kind of stuff.
For sure.
And so does anybody else have topic they want to hit before? I'm just going to give everybody a chance to speak, but we're coming up on 2 hours, which is cool that we had so much to talk about. I just kind of want to hit a few things because I know we all have lives to get on with too. That's what's hard to believe. But anybody else have any comments they want to say before I kind of go around for one last wrap up?
I have one comment.
Fire away.
All right. I want you right now to pick 4 people randomly that are in that made it to the 2 hour mark. First guy gets the brand new Spears and Munzel 3-disc edition. I will mail it to whoever it is that got it. So that's prize 1 for name a name.
Okay, I'll pick one from the last person to ask a question here is Chris Smith. So if Chris Smith is interested in the Spears Munsell, send us a message to, or you can send it right to Chris, right?
Yeah, Chris Smith will get it. He can message me. Okay, so now pick the next guy.
Steve, you want to pick one from HDE?
Evan Shepard's stuck with us on HDE.
Evan Shepard gets a Dolby Atmos demo disc. Okay, so that's
nice.
Evan. Okay.
Second,
number 3.
Second to last. Aaron Garman just popped in.
Aaron Garman gets a THX calibration disc.
Chris Smith says cool, and then Steve, you pick the last one.
Who is the THX one again? I'm sorry.
Aaron Garman. Aaron Garman. Should message Chris.
And then the last one.
And then on HTE, Bill Howard was in like right at the beginning and stuck all the way to the end with us.
Bill Howard's one of our favorite people.
Is getting the original Spears and Munzel, the one that's out for it. So that's our benchmark. Yeah,
some value adds. Next time we'll have to think of some giveaways. So just kind of going around what we were just talking about with film mixers. Somebody just said they would love to hear from a film mixer. This is the kind of content we want to put. Hopefully you heard tonight how intelligently Chris and Bill speak about these topics, and it's not just the usual marketing fluff or PR stuff. Critical analysis of things, that's what we want to do more of. So that's what we're all about. If you want to follow us, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we have a YouTube channel, and we have a newsletter. You're more than welcome to follow us. We would love for you to do that. I'm going to share Bill's information. He has a Patreon, or Patreon, however you want to pronounce it. I'm sharing that now. Bill, that should be up if you want to talk about that real quick.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, we just started a Patreon the Bits is basically a magazine, and we've done it for free for 26 years, but costs have gone up and advertising has gone down. So if you find value in what we do, if we've brought joy into your life or been useful to you in any way over the last 26 years, please consider supporting. We're doing some exclusive stuff there, a blog and various different things we're going to be adding in the future. And it just helps us to keep the digital bits going and free for everyone. But if you like what we do, feel free to support us. And you can find me also on Bill Hunt Bits on Facebook and Twitter, and the Digital Bits or the Digital Bits Com on Facebook and Twitter, and we are out there. We're on the digitalbits.com every weekday.
Yeah, and I can honestly vouch for him. Bill can back for it. I have tried to support Digital Bitch whenever I could, because I do know what a labor of love it is for him, but also it's a ton of work. Him setting aside a couple of hours tonight for us was also keeps him from doing some of the other things that keep him going. So
no, it's been great. It's nice to talk to you guys.
Again, we love the level of discourse here, and then we just kind of shine the spotlight back on TSR just for a moment. We do like I said, our product comparisons, our shootouts, and so on. Those aren't cheap either, but one of the things we ask is that people remember us when it's time to be looking at your next AV.
And let me just put a little pitch in, because you guys just helped me buy my new JVC projector and helped me get it all set up and figured it all out and helped me pick the right one. And that was invaluable to me. So I really appreciate it.
And thank you, Bill. Yeah, RS1100.
Screening room AV is great.
All right, well, thank you so much. And then, Kris, why don't you say whatever you're never at a loss for words. Go ahead and say what you got to say.
Thanks for having me, guys.
That's it.
I'll see you next time.
All right, Steve, anything for you?
Yeah, thanks from Home Theater Enthusiasts. Thanks for everybody tuning in.
Yeah, thanks from all of us. And I really enjoyed the discussion. This was great. Thanks, everybody.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks, guys.
Signing off. Good night, everyone.
Night.